So this workshop is titled Weeding Books and Creating Your Own Blackout Poetry. And I am a graduate assistant for the Margery Summers Foster Center, which is a unit of the Rutgers University Libraries. Kayo Denda, who is one of our lovely Rutgers librarians who is here tonight with us, is the director of the Margery Summers Foster Center, and she's a librarian for women and gender studies. So we'll get started by talking about what weeded books are, and then I'll talk about the project, Blackout Poetry, and why you might want to create Blackout Poetry and why you might want to use weeded books for it, the supplies that you'll need for this type of activity I'll go through. Then I'll show you guys some different project variations that are both thematic and technique based that I've created, and then we can get into a discussion about your reflections and ideas for this type of project on your own time. Okay, so I'm going to go back for a moment. If I can't see the chat right now, so I'll only be able to hear you if you do microphone. But does anyone know what weeded books are, or has someone never heard of weeded books? I guess I should start by seeing where you guys are at. If I don't hear from anyone, I'm just going to assume that you guys have no idea what weeded books are. Okay, we'll just jump right into. Oh, did you say?
Weeded books, from what I remember, are books that, like, let's say they're missing a page or maybe they have some damage to them and they can kind of serve a new purpose in a sense.
Yes, so you say the words serve a new purpose, and so that's indicating to me that you're saying that they're going to be taken out of like their regular use. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Yep, that's exactly it. So in the library world, when we think of weeded books, often people who are in libraries think of it as a collection management strategy. So to weed books is to yank them out of the collection in order to free up new space, or to get rid of books that are no longer in good condition or desired for the collection. So that process of taking the books out of the collection or reading them is officially called deaccessioning. And like I said, the reasons might be because it's not in good condition or it's not good for the collection, but a lot of times that would just take maybe one or two books out of a library's collection at a time. And large weeding projects might have to come about for space reasons. So libraries are transforming environments, especially as we move to more and more availability and reliance on digital materials. The traditional physical space of libraries is transforming to more cultural centers and study space and event centers. There are still physical books in libraries. It will be many, many years until a lot of those materials can get digitized. Not everything's available online yet, but there's less of a priority on shelf space being used for new books nowadays. And a lot of books that haven't been used in years might be weeded out of a collection. So some examples of why a library might need to free up some space, like I said, maybe they want to transform the purpose of their building, and some specific examples are on the Rutgers campus, on the College Avenue campus in Alexander Library, which is one of the main libraries for the New Brunswick Rutgers campuses. They're currently turning the reference room, which used to have thousands and thousands of reference books in it, which were non-circulating books. You could only use them in the library for reference purposes. Right now it's being turned into a digital commons. And a lot of that collection of reference materials was out of date or available online now. And so the room with, I think, 80,000 books in it got slimmed down to a collection of around 10,000 reference books that were kept and relocated to another section of the library. Another example of a library that decided to do a really large weeding project, thousands of books all at once, is a school that I intern at called the Lawrenceville School. It's a boarding high school in central New Jersey outside of Princeton. And with it being a boarding school, because of the pandemic and them having to rethink their classroom settings, especially last summer, like going into the fall time, they wanted to have a hybrid model of in-person and some virtual classes. And their day students, because they have boarding students and day students, the day students, they wanted them to still be able to come to campus sometimes, because it was a more welcoming learning environment, but they didn't want them mixed in the classrooms with the residential students who were more in a bubble and like a safer group for COVID community spread purposes. So what they did was in the library, took out half of the shelves in the basement and set up desks in the library so that they could have that academic environment and have their individual spaces that were socially distanced. And they didn't put those books in storage, they just chucked them. And their criteria for doing that weeding project was books that hadn't been checked out in 20 years or longer. So different collection management systems on the back end of a library can keep track of when items were checked out, how many times, for what periods of time, and you can organize that data to see when things haven't been checked out and group those items and then use that as a classification to decide to get rid of them. So that's what weeding books is. And like I said, sometimes these projects happen in really large batches, and libraries might be able to recycle a lot of the books, but they might not be able to because the pages are recyclable, but the covers aren't. And so if you're having thousands and thousands of books taken out all at once, the labor of cutting out the pages to recycle and then throwing away the covers can be pretty time consuming. So some libraries, depending on the type of items, might donate them to like a charity or a thrift store or something, or they might create a free bookshelf in their library of weeded books that people can either take for free, or sometimes a lot of public libraries will have book sales where they'll have a cart or a room of their weeded and donated materials, and you could fill a bag full of books for $5, things like that. Another reason why public libraries especially might weed books is because if they have really popular books that just came out and are in high demand, and a lot of people are requesting that item, they might decide to purchase multiple copies to fit that demand. But then after a few months or after a few years, if that book, because it's older now and is in less demand, still has multiple copies, you might decide to only keep one or two and get rid of those extras. And then obviously damage is another good reason to get rid of a book if it's got food stains or the spine is falling apart or it's got falling out pages, and also brittle books. So the acid that can accumulate in some paper if it was processed in a certain way, especially paper that was made in the early 1900s, can make book paper really fragile and brittle, so that it might crumble when it's touched. So some older books that have paper that was made in certain ways that's brittle, they might have to get weeded as well. So in all of these cases, there are a lot of materials being taken out of a library collection that don't suit the library's purposes anymore, but have some potential for reuse. So I think that Blackout Poetry is a great way to reuse library books because it gives new life and purpose to something that's discarded and possibly otherwise unwanted. A lot of weeded library books just go in the trash, or maybe they get donated somewhere, but they might not get ever appreciated or used again if the content is dry or out of date or just doesn't find the right home. So even if the content of the book isn't fulfilling someone's information needs, the actual physical material of these weeded library books could be useful for things like Blackout Poetry or other craft and creative projects. And I think that it's fun to take the text of a page and try to create a new meaning and expression out of what's already there. So especially with books that are like literature-based, like fiction books, the author probably has a certain type of story that they want to tell, And it can be fun to kind of twist and warp that and see if you can completely change the meaning or just give it your own personal flair by creating poetry where you're only selecting certain parts of that text and eliminating the rest. And probably my favorite reason for making Blackout Poetry, which I'm really hoping that you guys try it out for this purpose, even if you don't care about all the other stuff I just said, is that it's actually a really de-stressing and fun activity. The design work that you can do in Blackout Poetry, or if you're just going to do a total wash of blackout and just a few words circled, the repetitive nature of using a marker or some other tool to fill in all of that blank space can be kind of soothing. And it doesn't have to take very long. You could make a blackout poem in a few minutes. It could take half an hour. It could take an hour. It could take all day if you're really sitting on your poem trying to decide how to get it just right thematically. So it's a good way, I think, to take a break from studying or work and try something out with your hands that's also using your mind a little. Does anybody have any other ideas before we look at the examples of why this project might be interesting or fun, or what makes you excited to possibly try it? If not, we'll just keep rolling.
Well, they might be excited after you show some examples.
Yes, I'll show some and that might get the juices flowing. We'll see. Okay, so to actually create blackout poetry, first of all, you need a page from a book that you don't care about ruining, or you can also do this with non-weeded library book material. You can do it with any type of text. You can make blackout poetry from a page of a newspaper or a printout from, the computer, maybe something that you're reading for school, like an academic article or something. So there's really no limits as long as you've got some words, some base text to work with. But like I said, it is just kind of a fun reuse to use an old book. And then you'll also need a pencil and I would say black Sharpie marker, but really you can use any color and any type of marker. I think that Sharpies are generally just pretty easy to use and pretty inexpensive, but try your hand at any type of material you want. But the pencil component is very important because before you start making a blackout poem, it's going to be really important to plan out the poem before you just start going at it with the marker, because once you start, you can't go back with permanent marker and you might accidentally color over a word that you did want to keep or change your mind halfway through the poem. So I'll tell you guys about some project variations. So after you've picked out your base material, then like I said, you're going to want to plan out your poem. And I would recommend using the pencil to circle the words that you want to keep. And then the rest that aren't circled, you can black out. But you'll also want to think about while you're doing this, if you want to match the theme of the original text, or if you're going to try and create something totally new. So you might want to read through the whole page of text and see what ideas or energy it's giving you and see if anything inspiring jumps out. Another technique is to not read the text, but just to kind of like glance at it, almost as if it's a word search that doesn't have a logical order, and just see what random words pop out to you, and maybe let those first few random words guide the direction of your poem. And you can use whole sentences that are in the original text or individual words, which is my preferred method, or you can use individual letters. The thing with individual letters is that it can be a bit difficult to create because it can be difficult to circle individual letters and block out the things that are next to them without also accidentally covering up part of that letter. And it can be a little bit trickier for other people to read. But sometimes if you've got a poem started and you really want a certain word and you just feel like the poem needs the word, but the word is not on the page, then you could do a little bit of a combination, which is what I sometimes do, where most of the words that I'm using are full words from the page that I circled, and then some words are combos of individual letters circled in sequence. And you can also use imagery in these blackout poems. Just because it's a page full of text to begin with doesn't mean that it has to stay just text. You can really create your own style with shapes and even a little bit of drawing if you would like. That's especially useful in like the margin sections, or if there's a lot of paragraphs and like space in between paragraphs. Feel free to be creative to draw in those in between spaces. So now, just so you guys know, this isn't necessarily a poem. This was just an example for you of some different fill styles so that you can get a feel for what the different options might be for that. For the top section of this image, where it's just dots, I will say that dots are probably the slowest fill style for blackout poetry, because if you think of when you're doing a dot, there's so much time where your writing utensil is in the air and then your hand is still for a moment at the top and then it goes back down. So your amount of contact time with the paper is really low compared to if you're doing like a scribble, or if you're keeping your pen down and doing just like a straight fill. So if you're very patient, then you could try out dots, but some of these other ones might be a little bit quicker. So you could see there's some random scribbles, and you can do it so that you can almost see nothing in the blacked out section, or maybe it's not so important to you to block out everything in the back area of the poem, but just blocking out enough so that it highlights the words that you've selected for your poem. And down here at the bottom left, that's like a basket weave kind of stripe situation. I don't usually go in with a plan of how many sections and how many directions I'm going to go in. If I'm doing something like that, I'll just start by taking my pen from one of the circles to like another circle or to an edge, and just drawing one straight line, and then just drawing a bunch of straight lines next to it until I feel like, you know, it's time to change directions. And then in the bottom right, that scribble style is kind of like, if people remember the old telephone cords, and that my hand is moving in like a linear direction, but creating little loops along the way. And yeah, those are just a few options, but I'm sure you could think of others for fill styles. Now I'll show you guys some actual poems that I've created. So this one is created from the book Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which is a weeded book that was weeded from my high school's English department collection, not a library per se, but weeded from an academic institution. And this book was weeded because my teacher was retiring, and she had been the English department head for many years. And I was in her last class before retirement, and she was very sad because she said that the other English teachers were taking Great Expectations out of the curriculum after she retired. And my classmates and I didn't have a particularly great time reading the book in her class because it's very long, but we did have kind of an attachment to it because of just the experience in class. So we said, oh, can we have some of those books? And she said, yeah, sure, why not? So she let us have some. A lot of my classmates burned them in a post-school year bonfire, but I kept my copy. And now I'm destroying it with blackout poems. So I'll just redo this little poem in case you can't see it too well on the screen. So this one goes, grave, we all fell, keeping door wide open, trying to get out, never was a finer victim. Anyhow, look up. How did it seem to you? Expectations. So for this one, the first word that popped out to me was grave. It was in the top line of the poem, and it was kind of right in the center. And so I decided to do a fill style that created a shape that to me looks a little bit like a coffin, to kind of echo that grave meaning in terms of like a grave that someone's buried in, because grave could also mean an emotion, you know, a somber attitude or something. So in order to kind of clarify the point of your poem, you can use imagery for that. And let's go on to another one now. So this poem is, I'm not even going to read it to you guys because it's not very much of a poem. This is like an old school like workbook from the 1940s, and it's very technical, based on, you know, the subject matter, physics. So as I got going, circling the words, I decided that I wasn't really happy with the poem, but that I liked this old page. It's kind of like a smaller page. It's only as big as my hand, and I thought it would be a cute little poem. So I decided to just do some fun shapes with it. And, you know, maybe someone else would think that it is a nice poem, but I was just trying to experiment with some different fill styles. Okay, here is a Harry Potter book. I just wanted to show you guys on this one kind of like the steps along the way. So you can see in that center picture how I've circled different items in pencil, and this is, like I said, an important phase of the project so that you can get everything planned out and get the poem to what you want it to be before you work on the visual component. And in that middle one, you'll see that I have some stars and some polka dots drawn on. I thought it would be fun to do some like silver and gold details on this one. So those polka dots in the center picture are a silver marker, but then after I started doing all the filling, I realized that you couldn't really tell it was silver. It wasn't like a very bright silver color. It just looked tan, just like the background of the page a little bit. Once the polka dots were isolated, surrounded in black. So I decided to change them purple after the fact. So it's good to have some flexibility as you create the poems in case things don't go as planned. But if you are using a page torn out of a weeded library book, you don't really get a second chance because that page doesn't exist unless you go find another copy of that book to destroy. So that's why the planning will be important. Here's another page from the Harry Potter book, and I wanted to show you guys an intermediary step where after I circled the words with pencil, I circled them with marker. And if you are going to be especially using individual letters, but even individual words, it's a good idea to try and make the circle as big as possible around the word to begin with. And then if you realize that there's a lot of space below or above, you can tighten up that circle a little bit, but try to give it as much breathing room as you can to begin with, because also depending on the type of marker and the type of book paper that you're using, the marker might bleed a little bit and encroach on the words. So if you start with bigger circles and see how the ink is reacting with the paper, you can always tighten it up. But it's good to try to be careful not to cover things up. And then this one was sort of a weave style again, where I was just drawing lines in between the different bubbles and the edges, but I decided to do a little bit of curving for some of them. So yeah, there are all different options for fill styles. This one is just one that I wanted to show you that was my challenge to myself to see how fast I could make a blackout poem, and also to see what it would look like with a different type of writing utensil for the fill. So I used a blue pen because, you know, sometimes if you're at work or you're in a study hall or whatever, and you want to try blackout poetry as like a stress relief thing or just a little break from some other activity, you might not have special markers hanging around. So use whatever materials you have. And this one only took me 5 minutes. I just wanted to see how quickly I could get it done. I guess I haven't been reading some of the others. I'll read this one too, guys, just in case anyone can't see it on the screen very clearly. This one says, correctness, belief, adoration, enlightened, convictions, rebukes, conditioned, fatal damage, the other, indignation, intolerable as well in matter as in form, preach, write no more, election year. So for this one, a lot of these words that I circled are just adjectives or nouns, and there aren't a lot of verbs connecting them into like a logical like theme or story. So that's why I felt the need to title this poem in order to kind of contextualize what I was thinking about when I was choosing these things. So the choice to create a title and label it on your poem or to not have one can really influence the way that someone would perceive the poem. So yeah, keep that in mind when you're deciding whether you want to have a title right there on it, or you could, write the title on the back and maybe the date you created it or something. And also the types of words that you're selecting, like the different parts of speech, will influence kind of the flow of the message and if it makes sense to you and to other people. Okay, so when you're making Blackout poems, sometimes you might be going along and you might think, ooh, this looks really good as it is. Like, I don't know if I want to keep blacking stuff out because the design looks pretty nice right now, even though there are still a lot of words that were going to be blacked out that are on cover. That's what happened to me when I was making this Blackout poem. So my advice for you in that situation would be, if you have the option of making a photocopy, if you have a photocopy machine, then maybe you could make a photocopy and test out continuing to fill it in on the photocopy as kind of like a draft, and then decide. But even if other words are still visible on the page that aren't part of your poem, that's a stylistic choice that you might make that could maybe be beneficial to the message and to the energy of the poem. For this one, I thought it would be interesting to do a poem that had a little bit of a twist on, like, well, actually, this one doesn't have a twist on gender roles. I think I've made some other poems with these Cherry Ames books, which is a series that was written mostly by Helen Wells, but then the series was picked up and written by some other people as well. And it's Cherry Ames being a nurse in all these different settings, and I believe they were written in the 1950s. So you can play with social dynamics or scholarly dynamics that were current to the time of when the book was created, and see if you can draw some of those themes or shield some of those themes from the material. That's kind of a fun thing to try and engage with. Okay, so I'm going to stop screen sharing now. I will read these discussion questions out loud, and then if you guys want to turn on your mics and or cameras, well, not just your cameras, but then anybody who has some thoughts about these, I would love to hear your opinions. So for the questions, what types of emotions and opinions do you have about a library discarding books? Do your feelings depend on knowing what will happen to the books after they leave the library? Can you think of any analogies of how Blackout poetry is similar to other forms of information sharing and creative expression that you or others you know engage in? And one last thing to think about, and maybe you have some comments on it, or maybe you just stow it away, is the idea that if 20 people were given the same single page of, let's say, an encyclopedia and asked to make a Blackout poem from it, can you imagine how varied the appearance and messages of those poems would be? So I'm going to look at the presentation now, and let's see, stop share. Okay. I'll drop those discussion questions into the chat so that you guys can reference them.
In the chat, Whitney, so Kenneth is asking, so I wrote that, I had written that it's the Blackout poetry in some ways is a kind of transformation, because the page had a certain meaning in the context of the book in its prior life, but once you black out to create your own poetry, becomes then a canvas for something else. So yeah. Kenneth is asking, what could this transformative process be called? He's trying to, when something is displaced, to be recontextualized, a new meaning. The closest I'm getting is a juxtaposition, but I'm trying to find a word closer to what Whitney mentioned about giving something a name.
Okay. Yeah, so transformation makes sense. I would say that in like the furniture and art worlds, maybe the term would be repurposing. A lot of times items, when they're taken away from their original use and somebody's using them for something else, repurposing is a good term for it. But in Blackout Poetry, it also is almost a form of collage. Usually collage, like from its like French original meaning to paste, means that you're taking different things and attaching them together. So this would be more of like a theoretical collage as opposed to a physical one, but the idea of taking different pieces and connecting them in a new way would be perhaps another term that describes this process.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's I can start. I think it's the second part of your question. When I noticed that when you showed the Blackout Poetry, especially the nurse book series, also the Great Expectations, you actually showed the title, the cover of the book, which made very clear what the book was all about, right. And then you juxtaposed with the Blackout Poetry itself. So I was thinking, and you did the same thing with the nurse series. And do you think there is and you kind of stressed the possibility to create a content that it's either attuned to the original book or something totally different. So this kind of relationship, do you think it's something that comes with the territory? So I was wondering if you could talk more about the fact that you juxtaposed the title, the cover of the book with the Blackout Poetry.
Yeah, I guess that was more for, I just wanted you guys to kind of know what types of books I was finding and using as my starting material. But if you are trying to make a commentary that is specific to a certain social or professional history or experience or time period, then I think, clarifying like what the source was can be useful. But yeah, I think
that's good.
I think that it adds a little bit of depth to the poem to know where it started, where the material.
So there is in a way, there is a relationship. It's not totally unrelated, right? I think that's what you're stressing.
Right. Yeah. To me, they're a bit related. But if you were trying to go totally away from the message and you didn't care about the source and it was irrelevant to you, then it's up to the creator to decide if it matters, if it's important, or if it's irrelevant, where that source was. So, yeah. I see. Yvette, do libraries approve of this repurposing? Obviously, it is better than destroying the book, but shouldn't books be recycled to disadvantaged areas that have less access to books? That's a great question. So from my experience, when libraries are doing large reading projects, if they can donate books because they have the financial means and just structural means to do it, they will. So in the cases of public libraries, a lot of them have the space, like a rear back room, where they can just donate the books to that area where people from that direct community can use them. But if it's a matter of getting the books to, like you say, a more disadvantaged area, then the transport, who is going to do that transport, especially if it's, carts and carts or trucks of books, then it would be great, I think, if a library is going to try and do a project for someone on the team to do that research to see if they can get those resources or get someone to help them out if they can't do it themselves to donate books. But in a lot of cases, a lot of the material, if it's like scientific stuff, might be really outdated, and or like some social sciences stuff, you know, like psychology, social work, there might not be a good reason to donate it if it could confuse a new audience more so than helping them. If more current stuff would be better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that whenever possible to donate books, it's the best idea.
Yeah. Can I just say something? It's amazing how difficult it is to sort of repurpose, if you will, of the books. And years ago, I've been at Rutgers for 20 years now. Maybe until about 15 years ago, we had a wonderful organization called Better World Books. In its past incarnation, now I think they're just booksellers. Sometimes you're seeing Amazon in used books material coming from Better World Books. But in the previous incarnation, I think they had a grant associated with some other nonprofit. They actually provided library boxes, and they had some agreement that they were sending the books to Africa.
Oh,
so that is like the best scenario.
Right, that's like the ideal.
Yes. Yeah. So there was no restrictions, and it was great. They were happy to accept. We didn't have to, we only had to put the books in the boxes. They would pick it up, and they took care of the cost of the transformation that Whitney referred to, because it's really not cheap to send things overseas.
Right.
So, but now there are some organizations. I think the new version of the Better World Books also receive books, but they have a lot of restrictions. They have to be new within a certain time frame.
Okay.
They don't accept, they only accept fiction, no reference books.
Oh.
So there are a lot of restrictions, and they have to be almost new or new. So none of these things necessarily applies for our needs. So it's really very difficult. And one of the idea of this workshop came from the fact that every time we have a reading project at Rutgers libraries, we seem to come in contact with various users that are terribly unhappy that we are discarding the books. So right. Everyone has this tremendous feeling towards the materiality of the book, but it is something that is very difficult to deal with, that sort of a promotional idea of how hurtful it is to get rid of books, and also the practicality of it, that is very difficult to dispose of books in a humane way, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In the case of like the Lawrenceville school that I was mentioning, how they had to do a large weeding project last summer to make space for their day students to have home bases on campus for the fall term, they ended up just putting them in dumpsters. Like, I wasn't working last summer because I was just an intern, and they didn't bring us back on campus until the fall. But I didn't realize that they just didn't have the hands, or like they only had a 2-week period to do this project, and they didn't have a plan set up to do a donation. So sometimes the needs arise quickly, but if it can be incorporated into, gradual weeding donation programs, then that's really great.
Yeah, that would be the ideal.
Yeah.
So I don't know, does it answer your question, Yvette? Or Yvette has 2 questions. Does it answer question number 1?
Yes.
Question number 2 about exhibiting Blackout Poetry. So one of the poems that I showed you guys in this PowerPoint, I do not own it anymore because I made it to send to one of my cousins. I thought, instead of just sending them a letter, why not send them a letter and a Blackout poem? So in terms of sharing, I think that the most natural sharing method for me is posting pictures of Blackout poems that I've made on Facebook, so the people that I'm associated with can see them, giving them away to people. In terms of more organized exhibits or competitions, I actually don't know if there's any regional or national or international competitions that you could submit Blackout Poetry to. I haven't explored that. And the same thing with exhibits. I haven't seen exhibits of just Blackout Poetry, but as a budding librarian slash archivist myself, that is something that I would like to do. Like if I'm working in a library setting that has, you know, open to the public in the future, I would like to host this workshop in person, have people make the poems, see who's willing to loan it to the library for a few weeks so that we can do a little, you know, show in a cabinet or on a wall or wherever. So I think that if
I think it would be really nice, Whitney, to do an exhibit. And I was thinking even a digital exhibit, even the way you presented the slides would be something quite interesting.
yeah, digital exhibit could be good. Well, so that's, I will share my screen for one more moment before well, actually I don't need to share. I was just going to show you guys the slide that has my email address on it and the Margery Summers Foster Facebook page and like a survey for, you know, having attended this workshop. If you want to complete the survey and let me know how you liked it, I'll just drop those things in the chat. But if you create a Blackout poem and would like to send me an image of it by email, and just from my own viewing, or if you're open to other people seeing it, let me know if it's okay to post it on the Margery Summers Foster Facebook page. That would be really great.
Yeah,
And
it would be
also,
really great. So we would love to receive them. And
yes, I would love to receive them. And in order for you to make it, I have a lot of Blackout Poetry already defaced books that have pages cut out. And I would love to send any of you who are interested in doing this some pages from various books. Got the envelopes and stamps all ready to go. So if you would like some pages to create your own, send me an email with your name and mailing address. So here is, in that one that I just dropped in the chat, you'll see my email, which is just my name, first name dot last name at rutgers.edu. Yeah, so email me if you would like pages. And then I'll also drop the survey and Margery Summers Foster Facebook page right now, just in case you want to see those. Okay, this is already hyperlinked text, but I'm not sure if the hyperlinks are going to carry over in the chat. So I'll give it up. It looks like one did and one didn't. So.
And we also have a blog, so we can also post that on our blog. Actually, in fact, we would love to do that, but we're missing the Blackout Poetry items, the artifact itself. So we'd love to receive them.
I'll actually send all of you guys the slide deck after we close up for tonight. And so the last few slides in the slide deck have the Margery Summers Foster website, which links to the blog and our Facebook page, and my email's in that too, and the survey code is in that. So don't worry about copying things in the discussion right now. If you don't want to.
Yvette, you mentioned the workshops. All these workshops were designed initially to be face-to-face because we never planned for this COVID business to stay for such a long time. But and I think if and when we have access to a physical building, we would love to have this kind of a workshop in person, because there's so much rich exchange and conversation that we can have just engaged with the project itself. And certainly if we do so, we would love to exhibit that. So then we have to have Whitney join us because she's graduating in May. So because she's very talented, she's probably going to have a job somewhere. So we have to have her attending the workshop digitally. So she'll be the only digital attendee in our workshop.
I would love to. I'm not sure if I'll still be local to New Jersey after job searching this summer, but I will love to attend and keep working on Blackout Poetry with people in future terms. Thank you. Does anybody else have some reflections on how the idea of libraries getting rid of books makes them feel, and any ideas about the types of books that you would be most interested in working with? Like, do you think that it would be easier or harder to work with fiction, nonfiction, scholarly literature, more like news stories? What types of interests do you guys have for your base content?
Well, I think, well, I have a few reflections, like just thinking about all the questions that you asked. I was especially thinking about how this is kind of very similar to like when I do research for like my art history classes and taking all that information and then like kind of forming a new story in a sense out of that. And that's kind of what this is. I mean, we're working with library resources and stuff. So I just really saw that connection because everyone could have the same like readings, let's say for a class, but people write and get different things from all of it. But I think personally, I don't know what genre really. I was looking through some like fiction novels and I was thinking like because I write like poems, I usually don't have a lot of like conversation in my poems. So
Okay.
looking at fiction writing, it's like, I mean, it's interesting to do like a blackout poem with like, oh, what the characters might have said. But I think it would be even more interesting to see like, oh, a page from an encyclopedia or from something that isn't more like conversational and see what would come of it. So yeah.
Yeah, like different types of reports,
Mhm.
documentation, like critical analysis stuff. Yeah, it could be.
I was even thinking of like these type of flyers from stores and supermarkets.
Yeah.
It might be quite interesting to work with this type of materials too, instead of a page of a book.
That's a great point.
Oh, and Kenneth is also saying technical manuals.
Oh, technical manuals. I think those would be challenging, but could be very interesting because, yeah, it's not well, some might argue that the creation of it is a creative enterprise, but you could really do something more creative with technical material, really transform it.
So Kenneth, you're going to do a blackout poetry for us from a technical manual? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes. Yeah. I was actually just looking at one at the beginning of the presentation.
Okay.
Is it something that you can destroy or not that copy?
I think I should destroy it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that could also be a cathartic experience.
Yes,
if there's a certain type of text that you already feel strongly about, maybe you dislike it or it feels harmful, transforming it into something of your own could be a good release.
Yes, that has a different meaning, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna do it because I want to feel strongly about it.
Nice. Great.
Great, yes.
Please share your results if you're willing.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Yeah, my partner has some technical manuals downstairs that his company was discarding a few months ago, and he decided, oh, what a waste, like I could learn things from these. So he brought them home, hasn't opened them since. So maybe he won't notice if I take a page out of one of them. There are quite a few hefty ones.
What kind of manuals?
I don't know who the publisher was because I haven't really looked at them too carefully, but it was from an engineering company that makes lasers. And I think they were like electrical documentation manuals.
Oh, how to use this instrument or something of that nature.
Yeah, different instruments and I think like electrical design work.
So that sounds pretty tough.
See what I can do with it. Maybe the next time that we have one of these workshops.
Oh, yes.
I could incorporate a technical manual poem next time. The physics one, that was like a little workbook from the 1940s. I'll just read it to you guys now because I think I sold it a little bit short. It goes like this. June 1943. Determine, length of, describe, answer, find costs, final, downward, three forces acting, neglect, find the rate. So yeah, I probably could have spiced it up a little bit more, but like I said, that one was more design inspired. But yeah, try different materials, see what challenges you and what you find interesting. Does anybody else have any ideas about what material they might want to try? Like I said, if you send me your address, I will send you a packet of books that were weeded from the Lawrenceville School and one or two that I got at a thrift store, ones that were weeded from other places that I've worked. I actually don't at this moment have any weeded from Rutgers because I didn't start making Blackout poetry until after the pandemic started, and I haven't been able to go to the library for a weeded Rutgers one. So I can't send you any pages from Rutgers specific ones. But like I said, if you have electronic materials that you're using for your Rutgers related activities already, print out a page and try it on one of those.
Yvette has a question for you, Whitney.
Oh, am I going to collect the Blackout poems I made into a book? Well, that is a wonderful idea because I actually did take a bookmaking course during my undergraduate studies, and I know exactly how I would turn them into a book. So you have inspired me. Thank you. I'm gonna do that after I have a few more. I have probably a dozen or so hanging around that I've made, but I think I would want to get some more before I bound them.
Now, maybe you know this, Whitney, but we have our special collections and university archives has a whole collection of art books, which in some ways it's a genre that your book of Blackout poetry would be associated with, right?
Yeah, artist books. The University of Pittsburgh, their libraries also have a very extensive artist books collection. I think one of their artist books, the covers are the soles of a shoe, very eclectic, different types. So yeah, like you asked before, about like exhibition value, even if at the time of creation, you don't have an exhibiting place or like reason for the poem. Whenever you create things, you never know when an opportunity might arise to share them with people in the future and who might be interested in seeing them. So I think
I was curious, Yvette, do you teach here at Rutgers?
I do research at Rutgers. I teach in another school.
Oh, okay.
But you teach on a subject that the Blackout poetry could be useful or could be incorporated into the curriculum?
Not really, but I write poems and I draw. So I'm always thinking of ways to, do a slightly different creative, so I tend to look at things and say, oh, let's put these two things together that haven't been put together before and, make it art. So.
Do you do some bookmaking yourself as well? Have you bound any of your poems?
I have, yes.
Oh, okay.
I have a friend who's a photographer, so he took pictures and I wrote poems about the pictures, and we, created a book from it.
That's great. That's awesome.
But I'm thinking more of, so I took an art workshop with an artist where we cut out words from a book and made poems from those words, and that's why I registered for this, because it seemed very similar to that. But I thought, yes, why not mark up the book, because these were discarded books anyway. So
right, yeah.
I am normally based at Douglas Library on Douglas campus in New Brunswick, and we had we had a relatively large removal. It's called weeding of the, precisely the weeding of the books project, because the room with the reference books was going to have a renovation, and we were going to remove the majority of the books. And I think the ideal timing for this type of workshop would have been then, when the books are being removed, and we could actually select the pages and then make something out of it. And I really would have wanted to have an exhibit like you guys are mentioning, with the material that were being removed, to have this new life, if you will, right? That emanates creation, interesting ways of play of words, and even the page size, I think would have been an interesting project. So I hope that in the future we have opportunities like that we can make connections with possibilities, with an activity that needs to happen in the library, and sort of a creative process that we can kind of make the connection between the material and the people.
Right.
Right. Yeah, we're just waiting for more in-person stuff. So the exhibiting will be really fun once that's possible. But like I said, if you're making poems, hold on to them, and they might be good to show to other people or showcase in exhibits in the future. And that goes for everybody, even if you're not creating artwork or poems on a regular basis, keep them around, anything that you do create, and it can be interesting and fun to see where your mind was at and different things that you tried out in the past. These physical artifacts that you keep around can be reminders of different times in your life and different things that were going on.
I really thought the idea of sending the poem to a friend rather than a Hallmark card was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured it was one of the ones from a Harry Potter book, and that person and I have bonded over Harry Potter during our adolescence. So it seems like a natural thing to do. Once I had recently gotten the Harry Potter book from a garage sale, I didn't chop up my own copy.
I was wondering.
Yeah. Another thing, oh yeah, it's right here. Another just project that I'll point out is that with weeded books, it's not just blackout poetry that you can make. Like Yvette said, you can cut words out of book pages and make collages or things with them, reorder them onto a page, or use in other artistic mediums. But this is like another project that I made with some pages from a Harry Potter book. I just got these empty glass bulbs at a craft store, and then I curled strips of the book page. I don't know if I can get any of them out right now, but a lot of paper is actually pretty agreeable to being curled with a pair of scissors if you very gently tug on it. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
That's one Harry Potter book page is the perfect amount for one ornament. So if you do get a book that you make a few poems from it, it's already missing content, then just experiment with other crafts too if you feel like it, for repurposing.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do with carving books, and making all kinds of stand-up trees and landscapes and things like that.
That's a whole nother beast, but
exhibits of three-dimensional carved books.
Wow.
Yeah, I have seen exhibitions of that stuff, like digital exhibitions. If any of you have not seen carved book projects before, I encourage you, once you get off this call, to Google that, because some of them are pretty impressive and enchanting. Have you tried that, Yvette, carving books?
I haven't, but I want to. It seems to be, a very interesting, thing. I'm more like, sometimes I just paint something, and then later on I say, well, how else can I express it? So I recently did a painting of a tree, and wrote a poem about it.
Okay.
And now I'm thinking, after hearing your talk, to do a, a carved tree from a book with the leaves being words, like that I cut out or something like that.
Oh,
That sounds like a very
wow,
interesting.
yeah, sounds beautiful. Sounds beautiful. Just listening to you, that you can visualize the leaves.
Yeah, but
It
I
looks
have
beautiful.
to, I think the technique with carved books is much more, you have to invest a little bit more.
Right, different
time.
carving tools and probably more patience.
Exactly.
That's what I love
Yeah.
about Blackout Poetry is that it's such an easy entry point.
Mhm.
You hardly need any supplies. You just need some book page from wherever, or a printed out sheet or newspaper, or like Kaya said, an advertisement like circular for a store, and a pencil and marker. So for people who aren't already creating things with their hands and doing creative projects, I think it's a really great way to get started. And it's just like an ongoing fun thing that I think I'm gonna keep doing and doing. Like I said, I didn't start making these until after the pandemic started, and now I'm like, oh yeah, this is fun. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so are we wrapping up?
Certainly a good way to
we can, but Yvette, did you have one more thing that you wanted to say?
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying regarding the pandemic, it's certainly a very expressive way to, capture what you're feeling about the pandemic other than, just writing it out.
Yeah, to try and express internal emotions and feelings is a good theme to try and express in a poem. Blackout poetry is certainly a way that you could try to do that. I agree. Does anybody have any questions for me or final comments about this project and the process? Well, I think that